Good morning.
Good morning.
You ready to do some macro photography?
I am.
Hooray.
What's the camera doing at the foot of the bed?
I told you we're filming our macro photography thing today.
Why do we have to have the camera there?
Because this is where it all starts.
Isn't that a little much?
Maybe you're right. All right. We'll see you guys in the field. Good morning. And here we are out in the meadow for a great morning of macro photography. So it's we're in Michigan. It's early September, and macro photography in the field is very weather dependent. Okay, we want low wind, a good dew point that's close to the low temperature. So you see how there's mist in the air? That's because the dew point is close to the low temperature, and then that's when dew and fog form. So I think the dew point today was 55 degrees and the low temperature is 56. So when you see fog like that, that's because the dew point is at or near the low temperature. So that causes dew to form, which is really great for macro photography. So we're here early because we need to go out and find some subjects. So obviously the light is not up enough for us to shoot yet, but what we're going to do is we're going to try to find some subjects to shoot before the light comes up too much. And this is a great meadow for macro photography. We've got nice wildflowers. We've got a tree line to block the sun early in the morning, so we got a little bit extra time to shoot. Once the sun comes up, we're pretty much done shooting. So it's an early morning pursuit. It happens 2 times a year for us here in Michigan. The best times to do it are early spring and in fall from like mid-August through September into even October. And the reason for that is that's the times of the year when we get cool nights, cool mornings, low wind, and we can get some really good, beautiful, dewy mornings. So the first thing we do, we come out, we set our gear up, and we head out into the meadow, and we start looking for some subjects to photograph. So that's what Nicole is doing right now. She's just slowly walking through the meadow, looking for dewy dragonflies and butterflies and moths and spiders and all the wonderful things we can shoot. So we're going to show you how we do things. At the end of the video, we're going to talk about lens selection. There's a lot of options for macro lenses, so we'll walk through the different choices and why we shoot with the lenses we do. So here's, we're going to give you some example images of the kinds of images that you can make and the reason we get our butts out of bed so early in the morning to come out and do this kind of photography. All right, so let's look at some pictures. So this is what I love about doing macro photography, right? Beautiful subjects like this wonderful white admiral, a dew-covered dragonfly. All you gotta do is get up early in the morning and go out and find these things. Right, this is a Baltimore checker spot. That thing above it, that white thing, that's the chrysalis. He just hatched out and then went down to dry his wings, and then overnight the dew formed on him. Right? Just gotta get out and look for him. Every morning it's like a safari. You know, life and death takes place out in these little meadows out all around us. Just never know what you're going to find. Here's a question mark butterfly. Okay, one of the things that I really love about macro photography is it's accessible, right? You don't need a big giant lens. You need a macro lens, a tripod, a DSLR, and you need some drive to get out in the morning and go out and find these subjects, right? You don't have to travel around the world. You can do this like most of my macro photography for the first 10 years of my career. My macro photography took place in a little 2-acre meadow right down the road from my house. and I would just get out there every morning and find things. This is an ebony jewel wing just covered with dew, right? Some mornings are dewier than others. Other mornings you don't have a lot of dew. You got to get out there and find this stuff. Okay, we can back off and do more scenes, right? This is sort of more of a picture than it is a portrait, right? It's an animal in situation, vice versa, on some black-eyed Susan. Now remember, these animals are cold-blooded. One of the secrets to this is to get out on mornings when it's below 60 degrees, because these animals are cold-blooded. They can't move until their bodies warm up above 60 degrees. So you've got a perfectly willing subject. I found this guy. I clipped him. I pinned him up. I walked 100 yards with him, pinned him up. The spider showed up later. Right? Okay. Low light. We're shooting at f/16, f/22. This may be a 4-second exposure. Okay. I'm stopped all the way down to f/22 or f/16 to keep everything sharp. Right, there's not a lot of light, so that means I'm shooting 4-second exposures. I go out on windless mornings, because on windless mornings, that's when this beautiful dew forms, and that's when I can shoot long exposures like this, using a cable release, a tripod, so everything's nice and sharp. There's no camera movement. Okay, here's a green darner. Beautiful dragonfly. This thing's probably 4 inches long. This is just a study of the patterns and detail on it. There's so many things you can do. This is also very, very accessible. Now, the light, we do this in the soft morning light. Macro's all about detail, right? So we want that nice, quiet, soft light. Once the sun hits our subject, the light gets too contrasty and we can't show all that subject. So this happens before the sun hits our subject. All right, the other thing I really love about macro photography is an art form that requires the creative side, right? Composition and light and color and pattern and all that stuff. But there's also a very big component of technical knowledge that's required, right? Macro photography forces you to be a better technician. It forces you to understand depth of field and to get your subject lined up right. So you got enough depth of field, you got everything parallel so you can keep everything sharp. Right, this was a cool situation. These 4 autumn skimmer dragonflies all huddled together, just covered with dew. A really great find one morning. All right, so the tricky thing is trying to find a subject. And one of the reasons that we're here so early is we want to try to have time to find a few subjects to try to photograph. So here's a subject right here, and it's a beautiful little sulfur butterfly, and he's tucked in. I don't have a macro lens on this, so he's kind of in the middle of the frame, right? And he's on a nice perch, a nice piece of flowers or something. So that's a good situation. Now, one of the challenges is, imagine trying to photograph him here. I'll take a picture of him here and show you what happens to the background and everything. But imagine trying to get your camera in close to this thing. Your tripod's going to knock vegetation. It's just going to be really hard. So I'll show you one of the secrets, one of the tricks that makes this a lot easier. All right, so we found another great subject to photograph, and it's in a pretty good situation. It's a little viceroy butterfly, and he's right here on the end of this goldenrod. Nicole's pointing to him for you. See him right there? Now, one of the beauties to this, and one of the reasons we come out here in early spring and early fall, is that it's cool in the evenings, in the mornings. It gets down below 60 degrees. So insects are cold-blooded, and as long as it's below 60, they can't move until it warms up. So that's the other reason we get out here at those times of year. So, but once again, imagine trying to get your tripod in amongst all of this stuff to try to get your lens on that thing. So there's a really great secret that we'll share with you about how we do this and make this so we can get our lenses on it. So here's the image that we made if we shot the sulfur where we found it. So first of all, it was super hard to get our camera there. I don't know if you remember, but the sulfur was only 12 inches off the ground. We're crawling around on the ground. It was super hard to get our camera in there. There's a bunch of other vegetation. Getting a tripod in there was just a nightmare to get our camera in location. And secondly, look at this picture, right? This is a mess, right? The light is okay, but the background is a mess. We've got stems going through it, leaves. It just isn't a good picture. So this is the main trick to doing this kind of photography, is getting this sulfur in a position where we can take a much better picture of it. And we're going to show you exactly how to do that coming up next. Okay, so obviously that was a bad background, and that's a bad situation. Plus, it was really hard to get my camera in there. So one of the secrets to this is we will actually move this. I got a pair of scissors, and I just grab this flower up here close to the butterfly, and I snip this off very carefully. Okay, now remember, we're out here because it's cold, right? And this butterfly can't move until he warms up. So he's a very willing subject. So I'm gonna just slowly walk across the meadow and take him over to our station where we set up our plamps, and pin him up so I can get a better background and a better situation. So now we've got the plamp set up out in the field. And I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to pin this guy up. Right? Now, I've got him all out of the garbage. I got a nice background. I can shoot him both ways. I can shoot down and shoot into this lighter green, and I can also shoot up against these trees and get two different pictures. So I'm going to take a couple pictures here and show you what that looks like. Okay, so now we've got everything pinned up and we're ready to start photographing. Look how much easier this is. I'm standing up, my subject's right here. I got a nice, beautiful background. One of the things to realize when you do a macro photography, all the light's coming from above us, right? So we need to bounce some of that light onto our subject, and we use reflectors. This one's either gold or white, and that will bounce some light on. Or the other thing we use are these little LumiCube lights, and they're just little lights, and they have 3 stops, and they work really well. These, I actually prefer these over reflectors, and I usually just use it on the lowest setting, and I just click it on and I just shine it on the subject till it looks good, and then I take the picture. We'll put a link to these in the description below. So it's very low light, right? I'm shooting macro photography. We're often shooting very small depth of fields, like f20, f16, things like that. So that means for this particular shot, I'm shooting ISO 100, 1 second, 1 full second at f20, right? So we need to be on a tripod. We use a cable release. The other thing is we want to use all of that depth of field. We want to make sure that our subject is parallel, so that the back of the camera is parallel to the plane of the butterfly. And that's really hard to tell when you're behind the camera. A lot of times I'll get off to the side like this and I'll look at the butterfly and I'll look at the back of the camera, make sure everything's even. All right. So, and I'll just put the light on it, fine tune my focus, composition. Put the light on her and then take the picture. And then I'll check my histogram, check my focus, I'll zoom in, make sure everything's sharp, and if everything's good, I'm done. Now, because of this situation, because of these different backgrounds, I'm going to lower my tripod, and I'm going to take another picture with that nice dark background. And I'll show you that when we're done too, and see what that looks like. And that will completely change the picture. So whenever you can, move around, change your background. And I do use manual focus when I'm doing macro photography, because nothing's moving, right? I got plenty of time. The thing's just sitting here. It's not going anywhere. Shine the light on them again, bang out another picture. And it looks completely different than the first one. All right, so now here's the image, the first image we made of the butterfly when he was pinned up. And look what's happened. We're up off the ground, we're standing up, we're much more comfortable photographing. But more importantly, look what's happened to the background. Now when we focus on this butterfly, the background is so far away that it just becomes a nice out of focus blur, right? There's no background distractions, nice clean image. This is what I'm going for. All right, and then here's the image that we made, the second one. Now all we did was drop the camera down maybe 18 inches, and instead of lining up the green grass, we lined up the trees across the field to give us a totally different picture. And I actually kind of like this one better. We got a little bit, the darker background emphasizes the little bit of backlighting and calls more attention to the dew. But it's a creative choice. You can do whatever you want to do with it. All right, so when it comes to pinning our subject up, there's two really efficient ways to do it. There's this way, which is really cheap and easy, which just uses a plant like a tomato stake like this. You stick that in the ground, and then you clamp your subject up with this. This is just two clothespins glued end to end, and then you clip one end onto the stake, and then you clip your subject onto the other one. So you do such a good Vanna White, baby. Okay, version 2 for putting everything together is using the Wimberley Plamp stake and Plamp system. So basically it's a few parts. It's this, which is a Plamp stake, and it's got a screwdriver that turns around, goes, and that's the part that goes in the ground. And then it's got a clamp on the end that is fully adjustable, and you can pin your subject up with that and move it around. This is absolutely phenomenal. Now, this is kind of short. So what we do is we buy some of the extensions and we put it all together. Put it on the other end, baby. Put the screwdriver in the end, put that on the ground, and then put the Plamp stake on top. Bingo, bango, bongo. Super slick. You have totally positionable. I think this whole thing with all pieces and parts is maybe $100. Once again, we will put a link in the description below. The other thing about this is it's portable. You can tear it all down, put it in a backpack, and bring it out in the field with you. All right, so here is a photo we made of the Viceroy that we found earlier. And once again, just like the sulfur, we snipped this off, we brought it across the meadow to our Plamp and pinned it up. And this did a couple things. It once again, it got us off the ground. It's up at eye level, so we can shoot it that way. And then, of course, it got a nice clean background. Now the background is far enough away that when we focus on the butterfly, the background becomes a nice out of focus blur, helps to separate this from the background. The other thing I wanted to show you with this was the difference with the fill light and without. So here's a side-by-side comparison. The one on the left was taken without any additional light, and then the one on the right, we used the LumaCube Lytra light on low just to fill in the light a little bit and fill in those shadows a little bit. And the difference is subtle, but I think it's important and it's worth showing off here. So the one on the right, you see the colors, especially on the butterfly, how the colors are more intense, a little more saturated. Colors come out a little bit more. I think it also highlights the dew a little bit better. So it is a subtle difference, but I think it is worthwhile to put the effort into it. And then this last image is of that same Viceroy, and now all I've done, this is all about controlling the background, right? So all I've done is I pinned this up in front of a stand of goldenrod, and we've gotten this beautiful yellow-green background, which once again completely changes the image. So just like on the sulfur, going higher or lower made a brighter or a darker background, and that changes the image. So that's one thing that I always try to do whenever I'm out photographing. If I can take a step left or right, up or down, and change the background, it will completely change the way the image looks. Okay, as promised, here's the section where we're going to talk about what kind of macro lens to use. So what there's two things that I consider when I'm thinking about a macro lens. One is the working distance, and the other is the angle of view. The working distance is how close you have to be to get a frame-filling picture of your subject, and then the angle of view is the portion of the world that the lens sees, and that has a big effect on your background. What my goal is, I want to have a nice, smooth, out of focus background that lets my subject come forward. All right, so all of these images, all six of these are 6 different images. Each one of these was made with an exposure of 1 second at f/16 at ISO 100. The top 3 images are with a full frame camera, and the bottom 3 images were with a crop camera. All right, so let's take the full frame images at the top. So with a full frame camera, and then we've got a 60 millimeter from left to right, we've got a 60 millimeter, a 105, and a 200 millimeter lens. All right, so on a full frame camera at 60 millimeters with a 60 millimeter macro lens, I'm only 7 inches away from my subject, right? That is not a lot of working distance. I run the big, very significant risk of my tripod bumping into my setup or just scaring the subject because I'm so close. In addition, look at that background, right? Because we've got a wider angle of view, we're taking in more of the background and we're getting more depth of field and more background clutter coming into our image. All right, with the 105, I'm 14 inches away working distance. Still got some stuff going on in the background that I find a little bit distracting. When I move up to the 200 millimeters, I'm 28 inches away from my subject, and that background is completely blown out, nice out of focus. That's exactly the kind of background that I'm going for. So on my full frame camera, I shoot with my 200 millimeter macro almost exclusively. If I'm shooting with a crop camera, things change a little bit. Now with my 60 millimeters, I'm 10 inches away. The background is getting a little bit better, but it's not a big, huge difference. With the 105 millimeter, now I've got 21 inches of working distances. I've got pretty good background control. It's still a bit of a challenge, but it's workable. And with my 200 millimeter macro, now I'm 45 inches, almost 4 feet away from my subject, right? I've got a much better background, but my working distance is significantly compromised. There's a lot of times you can't get 4 feet away from a subject. All right, so with my crop camera, I tend to reach for my 105 millimeter macro, right? I compromise a little bit on my backgrounds, but I've got a more workable working distance. So the takeaway from this is if you're going to shoot macro with a full frame camera, you're probably best to get a 200 millimeter macro. If you're going to use your crop camera, you might want to think significantly about getting the 105 millimeter macro. Now, that being said, if you shoot Olympus has a 2 times crop factor. So that means your 60 millimeter is now a 120 millimeter lens. So if you're shooting the Olympus with a 2x crop, the 60 millimeter is a decent choice for you. So at the end of the video, we're going to put a link to how we've turned our backyard into a macro photography paradise. So stay tuned for that.